This will be Jdotb's walkthrough of Temple. Now, we start most Temple runs by shrouding to the first boss. You can choose to do this trash, but it's some of the most annoying in the dungeon. You can shroud this or invis pod it. Either way, you will need a speed increase to make it. And I should say here that, let me rewind this while we're doing it, because this skip can be kind of tricky. There's a mob right here on the corner that's stealthed. You will need to probably do something with this, like sapping this mob. Makes it very easy to get past him. He can be tricky to get past if you don't sap him or do something to CC him. And then there is a stealth mob right around this corner. If you try to hug the corner, you will aggro him. So you want to run as close to between this Crowlusk and this stealth mob as possible. Then you pop out of stealth down at the bottom of these stairs and pull the trash before the first boss. Now this trash pack looks a little bit different than it would on normal weeks. Because this is teaming, so like this Hulk dude wouldn't be here. But this pack, you need to watch out. There's a Crowlusk pup whose primary deal, he has less health than the rest of these mobs. He's gonna be annoying because he'll charge people and stun them for very brief periods of time. There's also a marksman over here that you're gonna want to watch out for. The primary thing he does is power shot, and that will shoot a bolt that just hits everything in its path. So if you see him aiming at you, you want to make sure that you're getting out of the way or interrupting the power shot, as it will hurt quite a bit. There's also a Shrouded Fang mob that pats around this room that you're probably going to want to pull before the boss. It will stun whoever it opens up on for a brief period of time, and then it's going to do a bladed, or like a blade, it's a Blade Flurry-esque ability. Yeah, Blade Flurry. That makes its abilities chain to someone else near the tank. So when that thing casts Blade Flurry, you're going to want to make sure you're not standing near the tank, as all the attacks will chain. There, I just got hit by it by standing too close to Shaq. So you want to be careful with the Shrouded Fangs. Make sure you're not standing too close. The Hulk dude does a ground pound ability. It's the only thing he does, where he'll just occasionally knock back everyone within. It's a short knockback. It'll just knock back everything within range of him, so it'll interrupt spell casts. Mostly just an annoying thing, not particularly dangerous. Now, all the bosses in Temple are going to be more difficult than your average boss in another dungeon, and especially so on Tyrannical like this week. This boss has it's actually two different bosses, Adderis and Aspects. You'll start off on Adderis every time, and the other boss will gain a lightning shield. Whichever boss is not the active boss will have a lightning shield on it, which will make it hurt quite a bit to hit the other boss. So you're going to want to make sure you don't cleave or anything. You just single target the boss that does not have lightning shield. Now each boss has a set of abilities that they'll use depending on whether they're the one that's the active boss or not. For Adderis, he'll do, you can see this arcing blade. He casts an ability around him that splits damage based on the people that are standing within the arcing blade. So you can kind of choose whether you want to have that split between fewer players and have them take more damage, or try to have everyone stack around him when he does arcing blade. That's up to you. That's not necessarily a better or worse thing to have more or less people in there, but it will split damage with everyone that's within the circle when he casts it. Then he'll also do a Cyclone Strike ability. Here, it's coming up here. He'll point in a direction and launch a cone of cyclones in front of him. And you can technically dodge the cyclones if you're standing in front of him, but mostly you just don't want to be in front of him when he casts it. So when you see him pick a direction on the Cyclone Strike, you're going to want to get out of the way of it. And then Aspects, when she reaches, and I missed this earlier, when she reaches 50% energy, Aspects is going to cast Conduction on one member of the group, which is going to put a debuff on them that causes them to take damage and deal damage to anyone that's around them. So they're going to want to move out of the group and probably use a defensive cooldown. And then when Aspects reaches 100 energy, like she did here, she'll cast a Static Shock, which does a big ring that expands and deals damage to everyone that it hits. So you're going to want either an immunity or a personal cooldown here when it hits very hard. So you want to make sure you have some kind of cooldown up, and as a healer, you want to make sure you have the party topped. And usually the Static Shock comes out right around the same time as a Cyclone Strike from Adderis. So you're going to need to be moving probably right around the time this is coming out, so it can be kind of tricky. But once the Static Shock gets cast, you'll see it does pretty heavy damage to the group. And then the bosses will switch, and then the Lightning Shield will go on Adderis, and Aspects will be open. Now, one thing you want to make sure about is that Lightning Shield doesn't switch instantly. So make absolutely sure that the Lightning Shield has swapped targets before you jump on the other boss, as hitting that Lightning Shield will do an incredible amount of damage. Secondly, Adderis starts meleeing anyone near him when he gains lightning shield and you move over to the other boss. So if you're standing near him when this lightning shield swaps and the tank jumps over to Aspix, make sure you're not standing next to Adderis by yourself, or he will start meleeing you and it will hurt quite a bit. Now Aspix is the easier of the two bosses in the active phase. Aspix really only does this gust, which pushes back someone. And then Adderis' ability at 50% is he casts Peal of Thunder, where he jumps to a random player and then does an AoE around him. Just move out of it. And then when he reaches 100%, he will do this dash ability. Now you saw here, he had lines on the ground. As Adderis gets to 100% energy, he will do a dash ability where you can see these lines, these arrows, and those arrows are connecting every member of your group. And he's then going to dash where those arrows connected. So basically, once he starts the cast, just move out of the line. Like we were populating, kind of here, in kind of a shape like this. You just want to move out towards the wall when that starts and just be out of the line of that dash, or else he's going to hit you and it's going to hurt a lot. So it's usually helpful to have everyone stack up or get close to each other for that dash. And then when the dotted line or when the arrows stop indicating, which means he's about to get ready to dash, then just spread out. So anyway, once he does his dash, then the lightning shield will swap again. You'll go back and you'll just repeat these phases over and over. So again, here's the arcing blade, this splits damage. Then he's going to do a cyclone strike, excuse me, and get out of the way of the front of him. This is conduction being cast by Aspix at 50%. This is the cone. You want to be out and nobody's standing in the cone with you, and probably have a defensive up. And then one more cyclone strike from Adderis, and then you'll see the static shock from Aspix. That's pretty much how each Adderis phase goes. You're going to get 2 cyclone strikes, you're going to get a conduction, you're going to get a static shock, and a couple of the arcing blades, and then you'll swap, go back to Aspix. Just make sure you're not getting pushed. One thing you want to be careful of in this, like Gust is not a particularly dangerous ability, except if you get pushed back into any trash you haven't cleared in this room. Usually you're not going to clear all the trash in this room. You want to make sure that you're never facing in a direction where Gust will push you back into mobs that you haven't already engaged, as that will tend to be a pretty quick wipe. And then so you just alternate back and forth on these bosses till they're dead. And then once you kill one of the bosses, then the fight becomes dramatically easier because they stop using their 50 and 100% energy abilities. So once we kill Adderis here, then Aspix will simply, all she's going to do is Gust at that point, which is, some pretty not threatening stuff. So once, well, actually, we managed to kill Adderis so late that she got off one more static shock anyway, which, if I remember correctly, caught us off guard. But anyway, for the remainder of this fight, she's just going to do the Gust, and you're not going to, it's just going to take time to wear her down. So being is that this is a rather boring end of the fight, I'm going to fast forward through the rest of this. And another thing to keep in mind with Temple is that the first res point update is after the second boss. So if you die, since we skipped all this trash at the start, if you die in Temple and it's not going to be a full wipe, you want to make really certain that you don't like knee-jerk release, because it can be really hard to get back to the group if you choose to do that same skip we did. So be careful about releasing in Temple until you've killed the second boss. Now you've got a Crowless Rider here. This hallway, the swirlies on the ground hurt quite a bit, so make sure that you're not standing in them, as they will deal quite a bit of damage. And then we pull this Crowless Rider, and Crowless Rider has a few abilities that are all kind of annoying from melee. He does a cleave in front of him. You want to make sure you're not standing there when he does you're not standing in front of him when he does the cleave, as it will hurt. He casts Electrified Scales, which is a lightning shield-esque ability. Anybody that hits the mob with melee attacks, when lightning shield is up, is going to hurt. So it's very nice to have a purge for that, if at all possible. And then he also does a breath ability in front of him, which kind of same deal as the cleave. You just want to make sure you're not standing in front of him when that goes out. Now this next pull has a few different mobs in it. You've got the Crowless Rider, but you've also got some marksmen and some Ophidians. Now the marksman we explained earlier does, like the big deal with the marksman is that he does the power shot. So you want to be sure you're not standing in that. And he also does another ability that can become kind of tricky to deal with, where the marksman puts a poison on a player, where if the player moves while the poison is active, it will put them to sleep. So if you get that poison, you want to stand still, and ideally your healer will dispel it off of you, and then you can go back to moving around. But if it's on you and it hasn't been dispelled yet, try not to move or you will put yourself to sleep. And then there's also the Ophidians that get pulled in this, and they're a pretty simple mob. They just put poisons on you that hurt, and otherwise not a lot going on there. Now there's this dust cloud ability that you're going to want to be careful with, where anything standing in it cannot be targeted, or it can't be hit by anything. So you want to be careful with this. These Shrouded Fangs are a teaming week pack that aren't normally here, but patrol on teaming weeks. And like we said earlier, Shrouded Fangs will open up on someone from stealth and stun them, and then cast a Blade Flurry, where anyone standing near the target being hit will also take damage. So this pack is one where you want to keep an eye on the marksman to make sure that you're not standing in a power shot, and you're not standing on the tank for the Bladed Flurry, as it will hurt. And there's a Krolus Pat that comes up here. Same deal as before with him. Basically, the deal with Krolus is don't stand in front of him. Always try to be behind him, and don't attack him with melee attacks if he's got the electric shield up. Wait for that to be dispelled. And we kill this one by itself because it's infested. I'll fast forward through this because it's pretty straightforward. And also the Krolus Rider, once you deal enough damage to it, it gets dismounted, and at which point it stops doing the breath. That's a Krolus thing, not the Rider thing. So once you dismount it, it stops doing the breath. It will still cleave, and it will still shield itself. Be careful for those. Now there's a couple new mobs in this room. There's the Crazed Incubator and the Tender. And for the Crazed Incubator, it does a few abilities. It throws a thing on the ground that does AoE, this lightning in a bottle. So if it gets that cast off, just don't be standing where it threw the bottle. But the big deal with the Incubator that you want to watch out for is when it gets low health, it has an ability called Pyrrhic Blast, which is basically a self-destruct, and it will do very heavy damage to anyone around it if the spell successfully casts. So typically, when it starts this Pyrrhic Blast, you just need to clear out and get away from it, because if you're standing there when it blows up, you probably will die. The Faithless Tender is basically a healer mob, and the deal with it is it's at various points in time, it's going to try to run over to these eggs and cast Drain on those eggs. And if it gets that Drain cast off successfully, it will heal itself for, I think, 50% of its health, and then also get a buff that I think is a haste buff. Now, occasionally you can have strats with mages where they spell steal that buff. So sometimes it can be a viable strat to let that cast go off and let the tenders get that buff and then spell steal it, and use that to your advantage. But it will heal them, so there is a trade-off to it. They're also going to occasionally try to cast a greater heal potion, which will do healing to another mob. So you're going to make sure you have that. You have interrupts for that, as you can dramatically extend a pull if you don't have good interrupts for their heals. And again, we've got these Crazed Incubators. They don't always, like right there, you see we killed the Crazed Incubator and it didn't Pyrrhic Blast. They don't always, there's not like a set time where it does the Pyrrhic Blast, but just when it starts getting low health, like under 20%, you're just going to want to keep an eye out for Pyrrhic Blast, as that's something that can come out at that point. So every other mob in this room is a combination of these pulls of either Krolus Riders or Tenders or Incubators. So there's a lot of positional awareness needed on these pulls, because you want to make sure you're not standing in front of the Krolus Rider for breath and cleave. You want to make sure that you're not standing near the Incubators when they're ready to die. And you want to keep an eye on these Tenders when they go running for the egg. If they get this Drain cast off, it'll deal, like right here, you see they got the Drain cast off. It healed them for a ton, and they got a buff. So you want to make sure that if you're letting that go off, you have someone that can either purge it or spell steal it or something. And that also kind of limits how big you can pull in this group, or in this room. The pulls in this room are sort of limited by how many interrupts you have, because most of the mobs in here, if you don't have ways to interrupt them, they're going to punish you. And then we finish off the Infested Krolus Rider over here, and then we do the Tender Pack in the middle. And once all the mobs in this room are cleared out, it will spawn the second boss. And the second boss is a boss that gets dramatically harder the higher the key. On lower key levels, a lot of times this boss is not particularly scary, but as the key gets higher and higher, the boss gets, it has kind of a soft cat or a soft enrage on the fight, because the boss sprays venom everywhere, and the longer the boss fight takes, the more venom lands on the ground and the harder it is to avoid it. So anyway, boss comes out. In the first phase, it's going to do the noxious venom, and it's going to do knot of snakes. And so it's going to spray this breath at a player, and it's going to leave crap all over the ground. If you stand in it, it hurts. So what we didn't do here, but what we probably should have done here, is try to get the boss close to a wall, so that when it does its spray, and everyone stand between the boss and the wall, so that when it does its spray, it places all the venom on the ground, like close to the wall, instead of littering it across the room like this. And then once the boss hits, I believe it's 70% HP, it's going to burrow and go underground. Now the boss is always going to attempt to go to the whichever wall it's closest to when it goes under. So you're going to want to make real sure that when the boss is about ready to burrow, that you're not standing between whatever wall is closest to the boss and the boss. If you're standing between those two, it's going to burrow and then immediately charge to the wall. And if you're standing there, you'll get knocked back. And it's very possible to get knocked back and then juggled, because you'll get knocked back into the wall, and then it'll hit the wall, and then it'll hit you again, and you can get hit 2 or 3 times from that and die very easily. So make sure that as the boss is getting ready to go underground, that you are not standing between it and the closest wall to it, or you will have a bad time. Once the boss goes out, then these venomous ophidians, 4 of them will come out, and they'll put poisons on their target. But in this phase, the first time they go down, they're pretty easy to deal with. You just need to make sure you have dispels for the poison, or be ready to do a lot of healing on the target. And then avoid the boss, who will travel in a ring around the group and then occasionally cut through the middle of the room. So just keep an eye on the shadow on the ground. After a set period of time, the boss comes back up, and in phase 2, it does a slightly different set of abilities. Now, one of the things that happened in phase 1 that I did not mention was Knot of Snakes. And Knot of Snakes is an ability that gets placed on one member of the group that stuns that member. And the Knot of Snakes counts as a beast. It's considered a beast monster type. And so anything that works on a beast, any form of CC that works on a beast, will work on the Knot of Snakes and can be used to break the person out. You're probably not going to want to try to damage through it, because that's going to take too long. You're probably going to want to use a CC of some kind, like a stun, or for instance, like a druid can hibernate it because it's a beast, or imprison or paralysis or anything like that. But anything, if you try to damage through it, the problem with Knot of Snakes is that oftentimes it's an instant cast, and if you're moving through the venom on the ground and you get Knot of Snakes, then you're gonna get immobilized in that venom, and it's gonna do a ton of damage very quickly. So you want to get that person out of Knot of Snakes as fast as you can. So you should probably have some kind of CC rotation in your group scheduled ahead of time, that people know that, okay, I'm next up on getting the person out of the Knot of Snakes. So in this phase, in the first phase, it was the venom spray and the Knot of Snakes. In the second phase, it's going to be Knot of Snakes and Blinding Sand. Now, Blinding Sand is just a simple turnaround mechanic. When the boss casts it, you need to not be facing the boss. So when you see Blinding Sand cast right now, just face away from the boss and then go back to attacking it. And again, you're going to be having to deal with Knot of Snakes in this phase, so make sure that you're paying attention when that goes out. And again, as the boss gets ready to go down, which I think is at 40%, don't be between the boss and the closest wall. So like right here, we were positioned poorly, and the boss knocked us back as it traveled to the wall. Now this, in the second phase, when the snakes come out, they're a little more difficult because they cast Dust Cloud. And Dust Cloud is like the mechanic earlier in the dungeon, where anything standing in it cannot be hit. Everything that you cast will miss. So you're going to want to try to interrupt the snakes as much as possible before they get that Dust Cloud off, to try to not let them cast it. They're going to keep trying to cast it over and over. Ideally, you'll have some group AoE interrupts or CC that keep them from casting it. If not, you'll just have to wait till they move out of it to finish killing them. Now, in the last phase, the boss goes back to casting crap on the ground, but not only does it spray the breath in front of it, but then it also just does random bursts of the venom like this, where it just doesn't necessarily spray it, but it just starts throwing it all around the room. So this is kind of the soft and rage to this fight, where the boss starts filling the room with venom and it becomes hard. You just have to keep moving constantly to avoid getting ticked by it. The boss is still going to cast blinding sand, so you're going to want to make sure you're not facing it when the blinding sand goes out. There's going to be a wave of snakes that come out eventually. You'll probably just want to CC these. You don't want to waste time damaging them, so probably try to have some way to group CC the snakes when they come out so you can just ignore them. And then you just need to make sure that you're moving so you never get the venom underneath you for too long, and make sure you're going to turn away from the boss. Now when this boss is dead, then this updates the res point in this dungeon. So now anytime you die in here, you will res in this room rather than at the start of the dungeon. These Nimbus abilities, they do an AoE when they get their charge casts off. They're gonna do an AoE around them that as a healer you just need to be ready to do some healing when they come out. And you probably shouldn't pull too many of these at one time. That release charge ability is going to be what does the AoE damage, and that hurts. So this is a good candidate for mobs to skip if you can. In this dungeon, as they're hard to pull together, they're not worth a ton of count compared to how hard they are to pull, or how much damage they can do to a group. Some of the higher keys. The Stormcaller, basically they do a shock that targets a random member of the group that hurts, can be interrupted. The real thing you want to watch out for with the Stormcaller is it'll do a I think it's Call Lightning or something, where it'll place a swirly on the ground, and if you're standing in that swirly, it will drill you. So watch your feet, because sometimes on these hills, like there's a slight slope here. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to see on the ramp. Now the toughest boss in Temple is the lightning orb field here. As a druid, there's a few classes that can do some cheesy ways to run through it, but mostly you just got to get good and not get hit by lightning orbs. Now we choose to skip the mobs in this room. There's not a lot you can skip in Temple. The mob count in Temple is pretty close to the amount needed in the dungeon, especially on teaming. So there's not a whole lot of things to skip in Temple, but that's essentially the pack we choose to skip, that and the packs at the front of the dungeon. Now these dervishes will do some splash damage around them and just do AoE damage to the group, sort of. So as a healer, when you pull these packs, you need to be prepared to do quite a bit of healing, and the group needs to kind of stay. The tank needs to stay away from the melee. They need to have a good spacing there. Or else you risk kind of getting cleaved. But yeah, this will be a tough pack, and it's especially tough because there's gonna be a lot of AoE healing required here, and you're getting ready to do a boss that's gonna require a lot of AoE healing. So you don't necessarily want to pop any AoE healing cooldowns that you might need for the boss. So this is gonna be kind of rough because you're probably trying to hold on to your big cooldowns here, and it's gonna hurt. This isn't even fortified, this is just tyrannical, but these packs hurt. Once you finish off all of the dervishes, it will spawn the third boss. That's what keys the third boss summon, is finishing off the dervishes in this room. They all need to be dead in order for that to happen. Now, there are not, and another interesting thing about dervishes, they have weird interactions with their corpses. They do not, we don't have any infested here, so I can't show that, but some weeks there'll be infested dervishes, but when a dervish dies, it does not leave, like for instance, it does not leave sanguine pools, and if I remember correctly, it doesn't spawn infested when it dies with infested on it. So these mobs are kind of weird with the way their corpses work. Now Galvazz is one of the most difficult HPS check fights in the game. The way this fight, it's a fairly straightforward fight. The boss has an energy bar, and there will be these pillars that spawn around the room. And the pillars will attempt to channel lightning into the boss. And you have to put your body between the boss and the pillar to soak the channel, or else the boss will start gaining energy. And if the boss starts gaining energy, he gets a stacking damage buff. And when he hits 100 energy, he'll do a big AoE cast that will probably kill you. So the name of the game for this fight is to just have people move around the boss and continuously soak the channeled lines. Now the channeled lines, as you can tell from health bars, do quite a bit of damage, and they stack up to 9 times per pillar, and then the debuff itself lasts for I think it's like 10 seconds. So you have to have a continual rotation of people soaking, or else you'll keep stacking your debuff up. If you try to do consecutive pillars, you'll keep stacking the debuff, which does more and more damage as the stack goes higher. So you want to make sure you've got a good rotation. You can technically do it with 3 players, but it's very close, and it's usually just easiest to have the 4 non-tanks soak everything. The tank is going to be getting blasted by the boss as well, so having him soak will a lot of times be too much damage for him. So typically you'll have the tank just focus on tanking the boss, and then the rest of the group fan out and be in a rotation for soaking. And then pretty much it's just don't let Galvazz get any stacks, as you really don't want the damage increase, and especially make sure that he's not getting to 100 energy, as that will almost certainly be a group wipe on higher keys. And as I said, this is probably the most healing intensive boss in the game at the moment, especially on Tyrannical, because not only are you having to do a bunch of healing on the group, but also the tank is going to be getting trucked continuously. So you want to make sure you have, you're probably going to want to make absolutely sure on Tyrannical weeks that you have Bloodlust saved for this boss. It's gonna make it kind of awkward Bloodlust timing, because you probably lusted the first boss, and there's way more than 10 minutes between the first boss and Galvazz, so you're going to be sitting on Lust for quite a while. But on high keys, Galvazz is probably almost undoable without Bloodlust up, simply because of the mana requirements. You can see here, my mana bar is about tapped at this point. And if we didn't have Lust on this fight, I would have been pushing pretty hard. So this is definitely a fight that you want to have Bloodlust up for. Now, when you finish Galvazz, then you hit the second Lightning Orb boss. And once again, there's a few classes that have kind of cheesy ways that you can get through this. I tried to wild charge over it, but I failed. And just work your way through here, and then you go across this bridge, which is going to have the Lightning Orb fields, and also these pillars put out a debuff that slows you down and does damage. So you want to make sure you don't spend any more time than is strictly necessary crossing this bridge. And then you have the sort of mini boss dude, Spark Channeler, on the other side, who's essentially just making sure that the tank has to cross the bridge, or else he's going to mess up the rest of your group. So you want to make sure you don't get across the bridge before your tank, because this guy hurts. So don't make sure your tank is coming across across the bridge with you. Now, there's a number of different ways you can do this room. We use a druid, because I'm a druid. We use a druid method, which allows you to go in travel form in this room, and someone else can ride you. And that person can if you pick up the orb in travel form, you will be slow. But if someone is riding you and picks up the orb, they will not be slowed at all by it. So you just have someone jump on your back, you run around, you grab all the orbs, carry them in. The tank just tags everything and runs around. Now, the ideal way to do this, and we're kind of still figuring out how we're going to get this accomplished, but the ideal way to do this room, these mobs, like all these conscripts that are running around and all the orb guardians, are not worth any mob count. So ideally, the way you do this room is the tank runs around and tags everything and is the only member of the group to get in combat. Everyone else in the group focuses on staying out of combat and getting the orbs in to the Snake Eyes. And then the tank, once everything's done and the group's out of combat, everyone else moves into the next room, and the tank dies and you res the tank, and then you don't have to deal with any of this, because it's all a waste of time. All this stuff gives no mob count, and it's annoying to deal with. So the best way to deal with this would be to just have the tank be the only person to get in combat with it. Everyone else moves through once the mouth has been opened, and then you just res the tank. And I guess I should explain here, for anyone that hasn't done this room before, this room is the skull has 2 empty eye sockets, and in order to get past this skull, which is closed when the room starts, there are 2 orbs, one on each side of the room. You have to pick up the orb and run it to the skull, and then place it in the skull. And this is made difficult by the fact that anyone who is carrying the orb is slowed down considerably. You can throw the orb once you have possession of it. So the, I think, intended way to do this room is to have people sort of throw the orb ahead, form kind of a chain with people spread out around the room, and you throw the orb to each other, blah, blah, blah. There are conscripts, which will chase you around, and then there are these orb guardians, which will attempt to knock the orb out of your hand and then carry it back to the orb pedestal that it's on. So you want to definitely make sure you stay away from the orb guardians when you have the orb. But anyway, so once you open up the skull, then the group can move through into the next room. And the way that we handle this next room is to skip it. We use Rogue Shroud, but I think you could Invis-Pod it as well. You might need speed increases to do it. But we Rogue Shroud this. And the idea is that you save this trash until the end of the boss. And I'll explain more about why you do that when we get to the end of this boss. But you save this trash for the end of the boss. Now, in order to start the boss fight, you have to kill the 4 hexers that are around the room here. And they're just going to cast Lava Burst on people and put Flame Shock on them. But pretty straightforward. Probably don't pull all 4 of them at the same time on higher keys, as you will not have enough interrupts to stop all the casts, and the casts do hurt. So probably 2 at a time, unless you're pretty confident in your ability to burn them all down, or you have maybe a prop paladin could interrupt them all consistently or something. But so you finish these up, and then you want, I need to be very clear about this, you want to let your healer drink to full here before you do anything, as this is a very mana intensive fight. So let your healer get to full mana, and then you click the boss in the middle and it starts the fight. This will summon 4 hexers. Now the way this fight works is it has 4 different phases. This is the first phase. In each phase there are going to be 4 hexers that come out, and you can see here each of those hexers is channeling into the boss. The goal of this fight is to heal the boss in the middle. You can see its health bar here, which is mostly empty. The goal of this fight is to heal this boss up to 100%. In order to heal the boss, you have to kill these hexers, as so long as any one of the hexers is alive, the boss is prevented from healing. So the group needs to go around and kill the hexers in order to make the boss healable. And then there are 2 other mobs that are in this fight as well. There's the Orb Guardian and the Plague Doctor. And the Guardian is important because when the Guardian dies, well, first off, the Guardian does a ton of damage to whoever it's attacking, so the tank's going to want to get aggro on it to make sure it's not running around dunking on the rest of your group. But then when the Orb Guardian dies, it drops an orb here. And the orb is important because when you click it, it causes you to do a lot more healing to the boss. So this is a very strong healing buff that you want to use. But the orb also has a limited lifespan. So if you kill the Orb Guardian very early into the phase, the orb can disappear before you're allowed to use it. So be mindful about when you kill the Orb Guardian, as the orb will only stay out for a certain amount of time. Then the Plague Doctor is just annoying. It casts, you can see here, Flawless got polymorph basically. The Plague Doctor casts a polymorph on the group that you're going to need to dispel. So it's mostly just a nuisance. Then once all the hexers are dead, you would ideally, all the hexers die, you click the orb to get the healing buff, and then the healer starts healing the avatar. The first phase, you heal it to 40%, and then it moves into the next phase. And the other thing is, you didn't get a good opportunity to see here when I was explaining it. Plague Toads will occasionally throughout the fight drop from the ceiling, and they will jump around and try to target group members and run after them. If they touch you, they'll deal damage and put a debuff on you that reduces your healing done by 50%. So it hurts other party members, but it's especially bad for the healer if they get hit, because you really don't want to have your healing throughput reduced by 50% when you're trying to heal up the avatar, as this fight's already going to take a toll on your mana, and having to heal through a 50% healing done debuff will make you use a lot more mana than you want to. So as a healer, definitely try your hardest to avoid those toads. Try to have your group members help you out. They can be like rooted, snared, all types of CC. So you just want to have your group help you out and try to keep these things immobilized or slowed while you're running around doing your healing. It's very helpful in this fight to have off healers. We don't in this comp, and a lot of groups won't. But if you have a hybrid class with you, like a prop paladin or a brewmaster, or like a windwalker or a boomkin, a class that can do off healing, it's very helpful in this fight, especially with the orb buff. The orb buff causes the boss to take like 1,000 more healing from every healing source. So it gives a lot of, even to healers that don't do a lot of healing per cast, it adds a lot of healing to their heals. So it makes off healers very valuable in this fight. So if you have a hybrid class with you as a healer, it can help quite a bit. Now in the second phase, it's essentially more of the same. You just have the 4 hexers out, you have the guardian that spawns, and you have the plague doctor that goes around CCing. So again, you just want to get all the hexers dead, and then you'll have the plague toads spawn again as you're trying to heal up the boss. Here's the rain of toads cast. They drop from the ceiling and they're gonna run after you. And so a lot of times it can be helpful to have your group kind of form a shield around you of bodies, so that if any of the toads do get near you, they can, worst comes to worst, one of your group members can soak it. But in this phase, in this healing phase, you're trying to get the boss up to 70%. And once the boss hits 70%, then you move into the third phase. And none of these, up to this point, none of these phases are any different from each other. The toads start spawning earlier and earlier into the phases. So they start, like right here, you can see the toads are already dropping in the third phase. So they start getting more and more hectic because now you have to deal with DPSing the mobs, healing your group member, and also avoiding toads. So we tend to try to save lust for this phase, third phase, because this is when the fight gets most hectic and the part of the fight you probably want to burn through the fastest. But same deal, the 4 hexers need to die, the guardian needs to be killed. And the guardian's usually probably going to be your first priority target because it's doing the most damage of any of the mobs. It hurts to leave the guardian up, so you're probably going to want to target the guardian first. And then once it's dead, probably kill the hexers and then probably finish up the plague doctor last. And so once you got all the hexers dead here, then you try to top the boss up for the last 30% to get it to 100. And once you get it to 100, then you get a buff in the last phase of the fight. And this is when I was saying to save those mobs on the stairs. And the reason for that is because you get this buff at the end of the fight, and the buff gives you a ton of haste and also reduces your damage taken by, like, I think it's 90%. So it makes you essentially invincible and also a powerhouse. And you get the same deal of mobs here. You get the 4 hexers out and the guardian and the plague doctor. So it's the same phase, but you're really not taking any damage here. And so what you do is you wait until you get this buff, and then once you get the buff, then you go back and you pull all the mobs from the stairs. And you pull them into the room, and you just murder everything together with this buff. And even if all of the boss mobs die, if you technically finish the boss fight, so long as you are in combat when the boss fight finishes, you will keep the buff. So pull all the trash in here, and even if you happen to kill all the boss mobs and there's still some of the trash on the stairs left, you'll keep that buff until you finish everything. So this makes it very easy to clear out that trash on the stairs down to Avatar. And technically the tank is taking a stacking debuff here. You can see 16 stacks. Each one of these is increasing his damage taken. You could, I guess, get to a point in the fight where this damage taken debuff gets so high that the tank actually starts taking real damage, but practically you will always finish this phase so fast that it's never a concern. And so then anyway, you just use the monster buff to finish off everything else in the room. And we discover too late that we actually miscounted the trash in this dungeon. So while everything looks great right now, and it looks like we're going to time this key, we find out after we kill everything that we are in fact 6 count short of finishing this key, and we have to run back and clear up some mobs. So technically we missed a timer here, but you get the idea. So that is Temple of Sethraliss. Like I said, some of these mob packs are a little bit different on non-teaming weeks, but there's no like brand new mobs. So every mob that exists in here, we walked through as part of this. You may just pull things a little bit differently on non-teaming weeks. But yeah, so that's Temple of Sethraliss. Good luck in your runs.